This is a, shall I say, auspicious day for having a discussion about the budget. I'm sure all of you are aware, if you've opened up the email that I sent you this morning, that there is a proposal coming out of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which, if implemented, would be very, very challenging for our campus. We will have a little bit of time to talk about what it would mean. My hope is that cooler minds will prevail and we will find a way to achieve the objectives that I think we all have, and which in fact were part of the UMass presentation to the legislature, which was a modest increase in order to freeze tuition, something we all wish was possible because we all know that our students are the ones who are bearing the consequences of increased costs if we cannot encourage increased contributions from the state legislature. That was what President Meehan presented. It's what the chancellors and all of the campuses were hoping for. Instead, I'm afraid what we saw coming out of at least the Senate Ways and Means Committee was something quite a bit more draconian and actually unprecedented, which was to freeze tuition, freeze fees, and impose a series of mandates for spending that would require some very severe cuts to our offerings for our students, to staffing, or a whole combination of potentially very unenviable choices. I sincerely hope that is not what's going to happen and that that's not what will emerge from the Senate vote on Friday. Those of you who have senators that you know and respect and who are representing you, I hope you'll let them know how you feel about this, because I think this is a propitious time for making our sentiments clear. I've been on the phone myself, as have the other chancellors, in talking with members of the Ways and Means Committee about what this would mean for the University of Massachusetts. I spent the last 2 days in Washington, D.C. talking to our senators, our congressmen, and their staffs about the needs on these campuses, and I have to say I found a very, very positive and willing audience there. I'm particularly encouraged by what they had to say about possibilities for infrastructure projects. As you know, we have a great big one right in the middle of the campus, and if we were able to secure support from the federal government to match the generous support provided by Governor Baker, that would be an extraordinary benefit to us. So that's what I was doing for the last 2 days, both on the phone with people in the state side. I spent quite a lot of time talking to our state representatives last week face to face, but I was encouraged by what I heard from our colleagues in the federal government. So let's hope that that's more the tone of what comes about. The purpose of today's meeting, though, is to allow you to get a thorough look at where we ended up in the budget last year, for this year, a little bit about the projections for next year and some of the concerns we have about the direction of the budget. I have to say, just by way of introduction, that in general, this campus deserves an enormous amount of credit, and that credit flows to you, my colleagues on the faculty, in the administration, and our students for very careful management of our expenses. As Kathleen Kierlees will explain, we are actually on target in every way that we could have been for our staffing, for what we knew about our expenditures. There's really nothing out of order there. But the revenue picture is another matter, and that is where our challenges lie and what we're going to have to work on. And I'm going to let her explain that in more detail. So, Kathleen, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kathleen Kierlees. I'm the Vice Chancellor of Administration and Finance here at UMass Boston. And just to sort of set the stage for this afternoon's presentation to build on what Chancellor Newman just spoke about, we'll spend a little time just talking about the adopted budget. This is a recap of some of the information that you may remember from some previous town halls earlier in the fiscal year, update about where we are currently with this current fiscal year, and then talk some about fiscal 20, what kinds of assumptions we have in the budget, some pressures that are on the budget, update folks on the budget preparation process that's underway, and then talk about some budget solutions and initiatives. And as a reminder, the university is on a fiscal year that ends June 30th, so we're well underway in the current fiscal year 19 and on the way to plan fiscal 20. So the fiscal 19 adopted budget. Back at the beginning of the year, back in July, the Board of Trustees voted to adopt a budget for UMass Boston and the rest of the university system. And for us this year, we are at a $436 million budget. So you'll see both on the revenue side, the different areas that we had budgeted for tuition and grants and auxiliaries and so forth, and then the expenses, the two biggest categories being salary and non-personnel expenses. We did plan this year to have pretty close to a balanced budget, so with the hard work of everybody who had worked through the process last year and having gone through a lot of the challenges that we had in fiscal 18, we came into fiscal 19 with a balanced budget, well positioned to move the university forward in a financially stable way. One of the requirements that the University of Massachusetts has for all of its campuses is a 2% operating margin. They really want those campuses all to have a 2% operating margin by fiscal 2023. So that's part of also what we're looking at in terms of planning our budget over a long-term time frame. Because of where we've been, as you see back in fiscal 16 and 17 where we had deficits, you've been working to structurally get the university's budget back into balance. Last year, we for the first time came out of deficit, and then with this year planning a zero. And then you'll see as we move through 20, 21, 22, and 23, we're going to be working to get towards a 2% operating margin for the campus. And below here's a little chart just for those who find things a little bit easier to see visually. You can see where we had back in fiscal 14, $9.5 million worth of for the operating margin. This year we're predicted to be pretty close to balanced. Oops, sorry about that. One other thing just in terms of background that I did just want to mention today that we've talked about at other town halls is the area of university reserves. And one of the things that we are working on is that with our budget is to really plan a budget that's balanced where the revenues will support the ongoing operating costs of the university, that we would not be using reserves to fund ongoing operating costs. And this is just so you can see the trend in the last 5 years of the reserves. We had started back in 14, we had $88 million of unrestricted net assets. Over time, now we were down at $38 million. Clearly this is a trend that can't continue. The university can't find itself in the position of not having reserves to be able to draw on for those times when there might be things that might come up, either unexpected or for planned kinds of investments that might be done on a multi-year basis. I also would point out that the Board of Trustees has a reserve policy. So the university, this isn't something that is just specific here to UMass Boston. It's something that all of the campuses are required to follow throughout the university system. Okay, so here we are. We're in May. We're in the 11th month of the fiscal year for 19, and how are we doing? The first thing we've got is some good news that we've been out hiring, and so what I'm going to do is turn it over to our provost, Emily McDermott, who's going to talk about some very good news that we've had around the faculty hiring that's been planned as part of this fiscal year.
Hi, everybody. I get to take the best news story, I think, of the day. And that is that we have been able to set aside money to hire new faculty for this year. And we started with enough money to do 21 searches. And we've increased that a little bit more, but right now we're coming in at this moment with 21 successful searches and a couple of searches still wending their way towards completion. We set aside, because we're concerned about the fact that we need to diversify our faculty further in order to match the diversity of our student body. We started setting aside money this past year for a diversity pool. And we skimmed off effectively 20% of the funds available for hiring to create a diversity pool. The principle behind it was that we would use those 20% of the funds to encourage faculty to look for target of opportunity hires who added diversity to the campus faculty, or where a department was already authorized to do a search, we would, in particular cases, allow them to hire 2 faculty out of 1 search if their 2 hires were going to add diversity to the campus faculty. I was remarkably pleased by the success of this program. I think all the departments, all the colleges pitched in and bought into the concept very wholeheartedly, and the result was, although we started with funds for 4 diversity candidates, we ended up with, so far, 13 diversity hires out of the 21. And that's because the faculty were on board with the concept so much that they didn't just go to the 4 that were set aside, but they found diverse candidates throughout all their searches. And many of the final choices were for diverse candidates. The numbers, I'm not sure if you can see them all, but the numbers up here say that of the 21 successful searches so far, we have 8 African American faculty coming on board. One of those is a Black Hispanic faculty member. We have 1 Native American faculty member coming next September. We have 3 Hispanic faculty coming, we have 1 Asian faculty member coming, and we have 8 white faculty coming. Of those 8, 3 are also diversity candidates in the sense that they add female faculty in traditionally very male disciplines in the sciences and in math and computer science. So this is a plan that worked. It was a plan that we put in from a sense that we really needed to address this issue, and it has worked, and we'll continue to follow the same principle next year. When we put together more searches, we're going to skim off another diversity pool and work from the same principle. So does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, back to Kathleen.
All right. So to talk a little bit about next, where is the university at in fiscal 19? The projection that you see up here on the screen is the most recent projection that the university has submitted to the university system, and it's for the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, which would be through March 31st. So here, we are looking at, I'm going to start with the expense side, just because I really want to compliment the campus on everything that you all have done this year to help us stay within budget. So when we look at the salaries and the non-personnel and the scholarships and depreciation and everything, we are actually under budget on the expense side for this year by a little bit. And so everyone's really worked hard to stay within their budgets and have done what they needed to do. But on the revenue side, we've seen a little bit of a different story. So the biggest story for fiscal 19 so far to take away is that really we are under budget. We have not met the budget in the area of tuition and fees, and specifically net tuition and fees. So we have our gross tuition and fees that we charge students, and then we have discounting that we have down to net tuition and fees. And here we are $10 million short on the revenue. There's a lot of reasons why that is. I will touch on a few in the some subsequent slides. And then we also are looking at the other areas. The state has come through. They have funded for some collective bargaining. So we do see that the state appropriation is up a little bit from where we had originally planned for fiscal 19. And those plans are made in conjunction with the University of Massachusetts. So they work with us every year on the assumptions around the state appropriation specifically. But that is, the state has come through for what we were looking for the current fiscal year. And then on the other revenue, if you might think, well, why is that up by almost $7 million? That is part of what we're seeing for the effects of the residence hall and dining. And when we originally did the budget, we had budgeted this as a net item, so we had a net, a small amount of net income on the dining plan. And really what we found out when we went through it later was we needed to put the revenues in that the students were paying for the dining costs, and then the expenses that we were paying to the dining hall provider. So that we just plussed up those areas in the budget. So overall, we're looking, if we put all said and done, we would be finishing the fiscal year at close to a $4 million deficit. As part of the continued cleanup that both the campus has been doing in partnership with the university system as a whole, we've been looking at the university's balance sheet and really seeing what are the different assumptions that are around balance sheet accounts. You may recall that last year we spent a lot of time looking at the construction in progress and what kinds of things we had in the assets accounts and really more closely aligning that. This year we've been looking at bad debt expense. The university has a new auditor this year. We've hired KPMG. We had Grant Thornton for a number of years. This will be the first year after a competitive bidding process of going to KPMG. And one of the things that came up during the preparation for this audit was the university's policy around bad debt expense and the allowance for doubtful accounts. And this is an account that we use to reserve against student tuition fees that students might not be able to pay, accounts that where they might owe us money. And so there will be a one-time adjustment this year that's going to be close to this $4 million. When I come back here in September and we talk about this, it's not going to be exact, but for planning purposes, we're expecting that this accounting adjustment will allow us to finish the year in balance as we had needed to, but without that adjustment, we would be looking at a deficit because of the fact that our net tuition and fees revenue is so much below where we originally forecast or planned it to be. So to talk a little about, well, why is that? Part of it really has to do with changes in how our students are taking courses. We've seen a migration of students they've been taking less CAPS courses and moving more into the day school and taking courses that are, once you take 12 credits, the rest you could take additional credits, there's not additional charge. So we've been seeing that. Our professional development and Navitas revenue is down significantly. Professional development down about $700,000 and Navitas down $1.8 million. So professional development is like ESL. So it's things that the university runs itself as opposed to Navitas, which is a third-party provider who's helping us recruit international students. In addition, we have seen our tuition. We've increased some of our financial aid. We've increased our merit scholarship. We've increased. We have campus living grants for the first time to help our students who have come to live on campus. Our amount of Pell students has gone up, so we have financial aid that we work to support our students who come here, our most needy financial students. And then also we're also seeing increased cost of attendance. Unfortunately for our students, the cost of coming to campus is growing much larger than our tuition. There's been an increasing gap there as well. A couple other things, the grants are projected to decrease this year. With grants, there's less of an effect on the budget because if we don't get grants, we aren't going to have the costs associated with the grants. So these are really restricted revenues that match up a lot of times one for one. It does impact us on the administrative overhead. If the grants go down, there's less administrative overhead. But in terms of budget, overall budget results, the grants are down. I wanted to point that out because it's something we want to look at, but at the same time, it's not a big reason why the university's budget would be any structural kinds of problems. The other revenue I talked a little bit about before, that had to do with accounting change for the meal plan, and then the state appropriation, which had to do with some additional funding that came to the university system for collective bargaining. And we're very thankful to the legislature for putting funding in place to support the collective bargaining increases that had been negotiated. Personnel and non-personnel, as I said, they're on budget. People have done what they needed to do. So we've brought a level of discipline of all of us to the university here, and that's very good. That will help us going forward. And our depreciation, we are able to realize a little bit of savings here. We've had some projects that would not be completed this year, and so the cost of depreciation will be a little bit less, about $1 million less than what we expected. So just the overall takeaway from this is we do expect to be balanced this year, but without that one-time counting adjustment, we would have a structural deficit of just short of $4 million. So moving on to fiscal 20, I want to talk a little bit first about some planning budget assumptions and some of the pressures that we're seeing on the budget for next year. So first of all, one of the first things that we do when we plan the budget is we start with some assumptions. Some are assumptions that we make internally with the subject matter experts that we have here on our campus. Other ones are assumptions that come to us from the university system, either working in collaboration with them or them telling us sort of what they are. So for this, we are planning for a 0% state appropriation here. The system has, last year, this current year, as well as this year, there is 1% currently out there that they would be looking to allocate, but as they plan the budgets, they've instructed campuses to plan it at 0%. For state collective bargaining, we do have collective bargaining agreements in place for all of our bargaining units right now. 2% is the level of increase for the fiscal 20 part of the contract, so that's planned for, so that would be funded for all of our employees. And then we're modeling some tuition increases that would be 2.5% for in-state undergraduates and 3% for the out-of-state undergraduates as well as graduate students. So those are things that are system-wide. So everybody in the system has been told these are the things that you need to plan for. Then when we get to the campus level, we've been working closely with our enrollment management folks, with folks in graduate studies around enrollment. So we are looking for fiscal 20 that overall, when all is said and done, we would have an enrollment increase of 2.2%, which is around $3 million for the university. With parking, we have finalized parking bargaining during the past fiscal year, so we can now put within the budget what we might see with the rates that are in place. Those rates will be in place for the whole fiscal year for next year through the durations of the contract, so there's no parking increase that anybody would see during the upcoming fiscal year. The ground lease, this is new, this is from the P3, so as part of the P3 residence hall a structure that was put in place for the dorm, the university will be a recipient of a $1 million payment for ground lease. So this is the last thing that comes through on the P3. So when the students pay the residence fees to the third-party provider, it goes through a whole list of what's called the flow of funds. So it pays for the debt that's associated with the building. It pays for the costs of running the residence hall. It pays for and that includes utilities, the staff, so on and so forth. And it goes down through that. And then the last thing that's in that flow of funds is the ground lease to the university. So that would be this will be the first year that we would be eligible for that. We'll have a full year of activity, and that's in our planning. We are planning a little bit of decrease of online for rates and enrollment. We are actively working with the University of Massachusetts Online regarding online programs and working with our own CAPS college as well to try to do this. But right now we're down a little bit there. And then the merit-based scholarships, we did for this year currently, there was some changes made to for our merit scholarship program that would then carry through this year as each cohort of students, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors move through. So the impact of that program for next year is about $2.5 million. And then on the expense side, two of the biggest things, as I mentioned, the collective bargaining and the dollars associated with that, a little over $4 million. And then also associated with our fringe rate, is our employees, is the fringe rate. The fringe rate is set by the state comptroller. It's applicable to any public employee within the Commonwealth. And it is up to 35.5% next year. So that is a cost that we needed to build in, and for us it's an additional $2.5 million. So there's four pressures here that I wanted to talk a little bit about. In addition, I'm going to also talk about the state Senate budget that Chancellor Newman spoke about when we opened the session this afternoon. So the first thing is the revenue shortfall. This is a big one. This is one that we're all going to have to put our heads together and sort of collectively solve. Our net tuition and fee revenue is off budget for this year. That has a carryover effect into fiscal 20's planning. We see our matriculated students a lot more taking in excess of 12 credits. It's a great story from a student success perspective, but we just need to get our finances in order to be lined up with this behavior that our students are doing. We've got decreases in the CAPS matriculation that likewise need to figure out how we're going to structure ourselves moving that forward. Our master's programs have decreased in size. Our transfer students are showing down. So these are all things that we're going to create pressure on the budget. The professional development and the Navitas, we haven't been immune to some of the challenges that we're seeing at the federal level around the national immigration policy and international students coming here to the university. And then we did reduce the student late fee, which is great news for our story, good for student success, but we did have to build that financial impact into the budget as well. Tuition discounting, I want to talk a little bit about that. So we have, over the past several years, the tuition discounting here has grown larger than our tuition has been growing. So it's actually been growing 3.5 times the amount of tuition increase since 2014. So it's eating up this year. A lot of our new incremental tuition growth is being eaten up by tuition discounting. So you can just see here on the chart here, it shows you the different years and where we've been and how we've increased the discounting. Why is that? There's more restricted aid. Our cost of attendance is increased. We've increased our merit scholarships. And then we have new campus living grants to help students with financial need have the opportunity to live in the residence hall, ensure that our residence hall is an opportunity that all of our students can take advantage of, not just the wealthiest. Enrollment growth, this is another area of pressure for the university. This is this is currently what we're looking at in terms of planning for next year. So you'll see with the undergraduate FTEs, we're looking here that we would be increasing our FTEs by 3.8%. This is across new students, returning students, everybody at the undergraduate level. For the graduates, sort of now stabilizing this, not having growth, but also not continuing some of the declines. The declines that have been going on this would be stabilized, and we wouldn't be seeing that as much. Continuing ed and online only, these are areas where we unfortunately are predicting a downturn. We are hopeful working with UMass Online for the online, as well as some of our own programs that we're working on getting underway that hopefully maybe we can beat the budget on this, but just to be conservative, this is the planning assumptions that we've been working at so far. We do have the increasing freshman classes. This year's record class, and we carry that through for next year. That's reflected in the undergraduate numbers up at the top. To talk about that a little bit more, new versus continuing students. For our new students, you'll see that we're having a very conservative approach here. We've seen the population demographics for the Commonwealth. And we want to plan accordingly. And I think our chancellor was actually complimented at one of the board meetings about how the UMass Boston was being realistic about this, perhaps the most of any of the campuses. With the continuing, we're going to see here, this is where our area of growth is for students, because we've had a large class this year. We're really working hard on retention efforts and really working to help all our students who are here stay in school, help stay on path to complete their degrees, and that we would continue to increase our retention for our continuing students. So overall for next year, when you put that all together, we're looking at about 2% growth for enrollment for students. The fourth budget pressure that I want to talk about, this is something we spent a lot of time talking about in previous town halls. It still exists. This one's a definite. This one isn't. With enrollment, we're making some assumptions. This one is based on the university's debt portfolio as it currently exists and the buildings that we currently have in service. So as we've talked before, this year in fiscal 19, this is the first year that the UCRR project and the parking garage came online. So pursuant to the depreciation policy, we take a half year's depreciation this year, and then we take the other half next year, and then we've got its full depreciation value for the next several decades. So for us, this is a big hit. This is $4 million going up. And then the interest associated with the debt too, while these assets were being constructed, we didn't have to pay for the interest expense in our income statement, so in our budget. We were paying for the interest. It was called capitalized interest, and it goes as part of the cost of the project, and you see it on the reserves, with the reserves going down potentially. But for now, the projects are done. They're on the books of the university, and so the interest cost is something that we plan for and have to pay for out of our operating budget. So that also next year is going up $3.2 million. So, $4.1 million. I was looking at this year, it was $3.2 million. So you'll see this is a $9.3 million increase for next year. The thing I would point out that's very positive about this, if there is anything positive to say about this story, is that this trend does not continue. This is the last year, then this stabilizes. And so we would be then looking at, we don't have a lot of extra construction projects. The substructure project will bring on some additional costs, but a lot of that's demolition, so that doesn't result in an asset that's going to be capitalized quite the same way these are. And then the last thing, this is unfortunately brand new. This is related to the state Senate budget process. So first I just wanted to just so everyone, just as just sort of refresher or background, with the state budget process, just how this all works is that the executive and the legislative branches every year submit their own budget recommendations. The governor comes out first with his budget, and then the House puts out their budget, and then the Senate puts out their budget. So where we are in the process right now is all three of those parties have put out their budgets. At that point, there's a conference committee that's formed, and the House and the Senate have members that get together, and they come up with a budget that would then go to the legislature to be voted on. Once they get to the point where they've got a budget that they can pass, it gets passed by the legislature and goes to the governor for signature. He can approve it, he can send it back, but at this point, we'll be at the point where we're looking to go now into conference committee to be able to continue dialogue around the budget. So as the chancellor mentioned, this proposal in the Senate is just really devastating for the university. It would institute mandates without providing any offsetting funding to cover some of the system's escalating fixed costs. What the legislature is appropriating currently right now covers the cost of collective bargaining, and that's it. And it's collective bargaining increases for the university's unionized employees that are paid for out of state appropriation. Any other cost increases for our employees, as well as any other costs we have in terms of contracts, utilities, and so on, that's all paid for by the university and is covered in what we do for our tuition increase. So the effect across the whole UMass system is about $22 million. For us, it's about $7 million. That's a huge challenge for us if this is what winds up happening. So we just want people to be aware of this. We're working actively to try to not have this become a reality, and I would encourage, as Chancellor said, everybody, we all can try to see if we can help to influence this, that this doesn't happen. 20, preparation. So we are well underway with our fiscal budget process. For everyone who's been involved with this and working so hard, thank you, and this has not been easy work. But we are underway. We do have some planning and projection improvements this year that have been going on, and so I think the first one is, for the first time, we're now budgeting the tuition and fees budget based on credits. So we want to know how many students are here, we want to know how many FTEs are here, but we also want to know when people are here what they're taking for their courses and what they are due to pay the university. So you would think we might have had this in place before, but in fact, practically any other campus in the system doesn't have this. But now through a lot of work, hard work by a lot of folks in A&F, in the provost's office, in the college, we've got a model that, so the numbers that you see planned for 20 are based on what we feel students will be taking next year for credits. So it helps really reduce our risk around the tuition and fees budget because it helps us better plan for what we think students will be doing. With that, we've also been working much closer with enrollment management, and I also, to really more accurately project how financial aid intersects with the enrollment projections so that we can not only plan for the upcoming year, but plan for it on a multi-year basis. In the personnel side, we're looking at FTE-based personnel forecasting models so that really we're looking at what the level of staffing is that we have over time as opposed to trying to look at it with trends. I mean, both ways can work, but we're really trying to work on modifying to have it be for the full year, for all full years. There's now position management, so anybody who's been working on budgets, you'll know your department has positions. We've gone through the whole list of positions. We've got positions. If you've got funded positions, those are positions that are part of the budget and that we're working on having as part of our regular employee workforce. And then also new this year is there is a new budget software that we will be using called Axiom. Can't say enough good things about this. Right now, the current budgets are done on the Excel spreadsheets. University of Massachusetts is a $3 billion a year organization, and they're doing their budgets on an Excel spreadsheet. So having a software package, it's going to benefit us all. Folks, financial people in colleges and in departments, it's going to give tools, reports, and being able to we'll be able to spend more time analyzing and figure out what the numbers mean as opposed to trying to get the numbers together and worried about whether the templates and the spreadsheets are all calculating everything right. So those are some big improvements that are coming on. We will have training on Axiom too, so we'll be able to support folks in making this transition. In the December town hall, we talked a little bit about the kickoff to the fiscal 20 budget process that took place. All departments had Q2 results, so you could see how your spending has been going for the whole year as you plan 20. There's been meetings with deans and vice chancellors, university finance folks to provide additional detail on the process. There was guidance that was issued along with templates and a final schedule for the process. Departments were instructed to plan at a 0% and a 3% decrease, potentially, and then templates have been submitted back to the provost's office in the case of our colleges, and then also to the Office of Budget and Financial Planning. Then there's been reviews, there's some meetings going on. We're still well in the weeds of some of that, really vetting out the different projects and seeing how that fits into the overall budget process. We did submit a budget to the system office with where we were at the time in April, with information that had been obtained to date that was showing to get to a required 0 operating margin. So where we are today, we still have some plans that we're not quite at the 0 operating margin yet. So this will show you for 20. We are expecting that overall with the tuition, this is with the tuition assumptions that I talked about earlier, 2.5%. We would be up in tuition for next year by close, when you take the gross up $8.4 million and additional $3 million in discounting. So up about $5.4 million overall in tuition and fees. With grants, this has come from Office of Sponsored Research. We've got some increases there. We expect some activity there on an uptick. Auxiliaries, we've built in the costs for parking as well as the residential dining. State appropriation, up $4 million from the collective bargaining and where we feel with the assumptions that the system had given us on that. So that overall, we'd be looking at, for all revenues, $445 million for next year. So that's up from where we have been currently. You'll see, we were 436 as I started the presentation, and now we feel because we didn't meet the revenue target, we're about $430 million on the revenue side. On the expense side, with the staffing that we currently have, and the collective bargaining increases that have been negotiated, we're at $275 million for that next year. Non-personnel, part of the reason why this is up $6.7 million is you'll see in this year's number that $97 million, that includes a one-time accounting, the accounting adjustment I talked about. So that goes away next year, so we're up to $103 million there. We've got some scholarship activity here, and then depreciation and interest, those are the increases that I talked about earlier as well. So we're getting there, we're getting closer, but we still have a gap to go of just under $6.5 million. So work will be continuing, consultation, planning, and so forth, so that we can get that in place. And the chancellor is going to talk some more about how some of the plans in a little more detail about how that might look. So I think this just recaps. I think I've just went through most of this here. We are going to post this presentation online. It's also being recorded, so you can take this away at your leisure and review this, and any kind of questions you might have, you can send them to me, send them to the budget office. We can, in more detail, get some information around some of these numbers. People have questions. But these are just different. I think most of the stuff I've gone through here in terms of everything, and just like I said, we're close to about $6.5 million to get a fully balanced budget. But the good news is there's lots of solution and initiatives underway that are going to help us be able to bridge that gap. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chancellor Newman to speak about some of our initiatives and solutions, and then we will open the floor to questions and answers for anything around the presentation or otherwise you might have around the budget.
To bring my box back so you can see me. Thank you, Kathleen. I know that was a lot of numbers to absorb. I'm not a numbers person by nature myself, so I start to go cross-eyed about halfway through. But for those of you who are, I hope that was informative and you'll have a chance to ask her questions that you might have. But let's now talk about some of the things that we will try to do to bring the balance back. This is going to be a challenge. I want to be straightforward about that. We are looking at some very significant challenges that have mostly to do with revenue shortfall. And how are we going to cope with that revenue shortfall? Well, first we need to emphasize retention. I've said this in many of our town hall meetings together so far. When we bring in a very large freshman class, we have to try everything, every way we can, and I know our faculty do this in the classroom, our advising staff does this, they are hugely important in all of this. We have to hold those students to us. We have to help them continue on toward graduation. If we lose large numbers of them, then all of that effort that was put into bringing them in the freshman year starts to dissipate and creates the problems that we're experiencing with revenue. So how can we improve retention? I want to give a shout out first to Joan Becker, to Garrett Smith, and to Gail Stubbs, and all of the people who work in advising for the extraordinary work they're doing to improve the retention picture. So as many of you know, we have now installed Civitas software. This gives us, for the very first time on this campus, some of the predictive analytics we need in order to understand where students are potentially falling off and where we can support them better, how we can draw attention for them from advising to try and deal with some of their issues, how we can bring in financial aid. We have various teams of people who get together on a weekly basis to look at students who have emergency financial needs, for example, and all of this is directed at helping them to graduate in higher numbers and in a more timely fashion. But Civitas is new to us, so this is an opportunity for us to take advantage of some of the new technologies that are helping us to track student performance. We have been building, our colleagues on the technical side have been building a new CRM, which helps us to see a whole student. So rather than just having databases that interact for one particular purpose, we can now look at, what has happened to Sally in all of these different areas, in financial aid, in academics, in, library fees, any way in which Sally has been affected by any interaction with our university, we can now look at the whole student. That was not possible before. It was not possible, for example, for our advising staff to meet with a student, take notes about that student's needs, solve a problem, record that somewhere, and make that available to any other advisor that might have looked down the line at where that student's financial problems might have been. You couldn't see a whole student, and now you can because of the CRM that has been built. We have been working on both modeling and affecting billing changes, trying to reduce late fees, increase the hold threshold so that we don't lose students for trivial reasons, for small amounts of money, but that we actually try to attend to their needs and give them the opportunity to keep going. The efforts that you have made in the classroom and in your planning in departments to reduce course bottlenecks. If students can't get the courses they need, they will either drop out or become very frustrated or have to repeat courses or not be able to get the courses they need to keep progressing in a timely fashion. And so there's a lot of work that's been done to try and figure out where those bottlenecks are and try to remove them. So all of those things, we hope, are going to make a difference for retention. And retention is the single biggest thing we can affect. And so I want to encourage everyone in the room to sort of bear down on that and do everything we all can, each in our own way, to improve retention. Enrollment efforts. We are working with our partners, Shorelight, for example, Shorelight Education and Navitas. They help us with international enrollments at the undergraduate level and now at the graduate level as well. We have developed our computer science department, a shout out to them for being the first in line. We have developed a new STEM program with Shorelight, which is a completely different enterprise, and will begin broadcasting from the Healy Library from a new studio that Shorelight is building, broadcasting our degree programs to Shanghai and other parts of the world, where students will be able to receive that instruction and complete the first year of a graduate degree without leaving their home country, and then join us in the second year to complete a master's degree and qualify for the optional practical training visa, which is important to so many international students. This is a new and system-wide effort. The Dartmouth campus is going to pioneer degrees in mechanical engineering, in electrical and computer engineering, and we're handling computer science. The Amherst campus already has an electrical and computer engineering course of study that is now beaming to 3 cities in China. So these are important international education efforts, and they are new, and the technology behind them is extraordinary. I will have some demonstrations in the fall, and I hope you will come and see. Because when you see those students in classrooms in Shanghai, and there isn't a single lapse in the time between a spoken word and a volley back from a student who's on the other end of the world, it's quite something to see. This is a novel innovation, and I hope it's going to lead to some extraordinary international enrollment flows for us. In the end, the Shorelight firm is promising or hoping to develop programs in 15 different countries around the world, and our lectures from our colleagues will be beamed to them. The STEM programs are just the first. There will be other applications, other opportunities for departments to participate, and we hope that that will be robust and interesting. The Navitas company, we've had some enrollment fluctuations with them. I'm not entirely happy about that. They are under new management, or they will be, and I'm hoping to see some improvements. With admissions and financial aid, we are looking to adjust the merit scholarship charges for out-of-state students to try and make us as attractive a destination as possible. And we are focusing on increasing summer enrollment, another very important revenue line. So that's just on our campus. At a system-wide level, as you've probably heard, many of you attended a meeting in which Don Kilburn talked about the efforts he's making to grow a new enterprise in online. There's still a lot of questions about this, and I'm not even entirely clear on the timing of when it might get started. So in the meantime, for our own online programs, we are going to be devoting more attention to boosting online. We have had some enrollment wobbles there that have made us budgetarily vulnerable. We need to work on that. Shared services, you've heard Marie Bowen talk about this. There is a meeting, I think on May 20th, Monday, May 20th, where Lisa Calisi from the system office will be coming to talk to anyone who's interested about shared services, but the purpose here is to become more efficient and effective, we hope, especially in 2 of the 3 areas you see here, procurement and accounts payable. Payroll is something that's coming downstream later. And finally, in general, we are looking across the system to become more efficient and effective because it's cost effective to do so. Other things that we are going to do on campus. We are engaging in some administrative reorganizations. We have a report that we prepared for Faculty Council that looks at some of those administrative reorganizations. We have conducted them so far in advancement, in human resources. We have some external reports on facilities. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different areas in administration where we hope we can become more efficient and more streamlined. That will help us with our costs. Substantial fundraising, and here I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Vice Chancellor Adam Wise, down here in the front. All of you should know Adam. All of you should work with him and his staff. We were given a target this year by the President's Office of $10.5 million in fundraising. To date, I believe we're up to 22 or 23 million, so we have completely blown through that target. Thank you very much, all people involved. In order to get there, we had to invest in advancement. And that was one of the few areas where we did increase the resources that we were spending. But there's a reason. You get what you pay for. And we have just seen an enormous return to that investment. And it means that we brought on people who were extraordinarily accomplished in this area. Adam himself, as many of you know, came to us from BU, where he was one of the architects of their $1.4 billion campaign. And I have asked him to please rewind and repeat right here. And we're making progress. We really are. I mean, one of the most encouraging things for me as chancellor, I must say, is the extraordinary reception of alumni and supporters all over the country who are alive to the extraordinary value of an education here and who remember what this campus did for them and understand how their own success has been enabled by the education they received here, and they would like to give back, and they are giving back. And that's where that $23 million has come from. Shared services I've already mentioned, and renewed investment in online. So these are some of the things, I've already mentioned some of this. Let me mention one other thing I haven't talked about, which is we're calling it the Boston Consortium because it doesn't have another name just yet. How many of you are familiar with the Western Massachusetts 5-College Consortium? Lots of you know about it. Well, one morning in the shower, I said to myself, there is nothing special about Western Massachusetts that couldn't be replicated here in forming a consortium with similar benefits. So I began meeting with, and I've met now, I think, with 9 or 10 of the presidents of the liberal arts colleges downtown, all around central Boston, to talk to them about ways in which we might collaborate. And there are a couple of ways in which this could be beneficial to us. I have been talking to them about developing 4+1 programs where students complete their undergraduate degrees with them and come to us to complete master's degrees. They are very interested in this idea, in part because it would give them something to market as they go out to explain to parents the value of the liberal arts degrees they're offering, which could, done efficiently, migrate toward a master's degree in 5 years with us. We have these excellent, powerful professional schools, and by definition, the liberal arts colleges do not, for the most part. Another potential collaboration, which I did not anticipate, but was interesting to me in talking to some of these presidents, they're by definition very small. That means that their departments often have faculty who are sort of working across many different areas, but can't necessarily offer courses at the very advanced level in many fields. That would run all the way from languages to advanced biochemistry. They are interested in the possibility of their students enrolling in our advanced undergraduate courses because they just don't have a large enough faculty to be that specialized. And so that's another area I didn't even anticipate that might be fruitful. As I said, I've now met with 9 or 10 of these liberal arts college presidents, and I'm inviting all of them to a group meeting in June, and I'm asking them to bring their financial people and to meet with our deans to see where the matchups might exist. They would be different for each of those colleges. We are going to have to look at our financial aid programs. This is my absolute last choice place to look for savings because we know how much our students need them. This is why raising money for financial aid is my highest priority because we know how deserving our students are. Nonetheless, we have to bring financial aid in line with the resources that we have, and we're going to have to work hard to develop new online programs to boost our revenue. So that brings us to the end of the presentation as we have it, but we do want to now spend at least a half an hour longer if you have the patience to entertain your questions. We've got 2 microphones that are being circulated. They will, just please raise your hands and we'll come around. Caroline, our student worker, and Ann Riley, my chief of staff. And so if you have a question, please identify yourself so we know who we're talking to, and we'll do our best to answer.
Hi, thanks for your presentation and the numbers, very helpful. I'm Mitch Manning, Joyner Institute Associate Director of Faculty in the English Department and Labor Studies. I noticed the glide paths for the centers and institutes were not in your presentation, either as cost savings or as the future. What is the viability of the glide paths? Are you still planning on going forward? If they do go forward July 1st, my job goes to 10% and I no longer have a full-time job, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can see why it matters so much. The glide path is part of the budget cut that the Senate, for example, is putting up there. That's where that $7.1 million comes from. It's partly the centers and institutes and partly what we would be assessed just in terms of our enrollment. But in order to meet our budget targets, we do assume the glide path in there. We have to. And we are very serious about doing everything we can to support your efforts and efforts that are being made in advancement to try and find additional resources for the centers and institutes, but the glide path is there to stay. It has to be, or we would be even deeper in deficit. Next question.
So to follow up on that comment and to go back to the earlier comments that Emily offered about how excited she is about the diversity in faculty hiring, there is a great concern that the centers dealing with diversity on this campus have always been one of their greatest strengths, and we are the only university that has centers representing all of the major racial and ethnic groups in the United States. That is part of our strength as an urban university, and it seems that the appointed committee that studied all of these issues unanimously, which included 5 members of the administrative staff on the committee, unanimously recommended that the glide path not be followed, and that at least for this coming fiscal year that the centers and institutes be funded at the same level. I find a considerable conflict between your stated personal research, the stated comments of Emily McDermott regarding diversity and inclusion, and what is happening with the centers on this campus that are critical to our highly diverse student body. And I really am concerned about the rationale behind the decision making, the message that it's sending to our students and to our faculty of color.
I appreciate your comments. I also want to say that we all appreciate the extraordinary work done by the centers and institutes. We are very proud of that work. We believe it's crucial and important. But our first priority has to be making sure that our students have the classes they need, that our faculty remains strong and replenished when people leave us, that we are keeping within our budget, which we have no choice about. We have to stick to that budget. That I wish we had more discretion, but we don't. So the prospect of relieving the centers and institutes from the unfortunate need to pursue that glide path just wasn't an option. We would have had to cut somewhere else. We would have had, yes, we would have had to cut staff. We would have had to cut faculty, non-tenure track faculty or providing instruction. We would have had to look at all kinds of, I think, pretty severe cuts to our primary mission, which is in the classroom and on behalf of our students. And I recognize that our centers and institutes don't see it that way and are very troubled by this, but those are the priorities we must attend to. And the hiring of diverse faculty, so they're in front of the students in the classroom, is a powerful commitment I believe we all share. But let me just say that we are serious about the fundraising side of this. And we've had some success with some of the ethnic institutes, and I hope we will see more. I intend to devote a lot of my own personal time to that fundraising because it's crucial. And it's also the way in which centers and institutes on every other campus I've ever been on are supported. So we need to also put shoulder to wheel. I do, in particular, and Adam does and his staff. And in collaboration with you, look for those resources for our veterans, for our centers and institutes on women in public policy. There's so many that are very valuable. And I recognize this is a difficult time, but we have to put the priorities where they must be. Next question. There's a question up there. Can somebody get a microphone up there?
Thank you. I mean, I've heard you speak about the trend for all the states to not invest in higher education throughout the country, and there's been a movement, the Red for Ed movement, that's
Yes.
sweeping across the country in places like Indiana, Arizona, some of these places they have on this flyer. So we're having there's going to be a rally at the State House on May 16th, and so my first question is, will you come to it? And
If my calendar will let me be there, I will definitely be there. I will tell you, I've been in the same hallways you have been and more, because I absolutely, completely support this effort. I think we all do. It is, in my opinion, a crying shame that a state that advertises itself as the best educated state in the country ranks something like 23rd or 24th in state funding, below a whole series of pretty abysmal states It is not a credit to Massachusetts that it is so poorly funded and that it's going in the wrong direction. So I compliment you. I hope everyone turns out. I think it's really exceptionally important, and I will not only be with you if I can, but that's why I was in Washington for the last 2 days, and that's why I've been on the phone to the State House and pounding around the State House, just as you have been.
Well, thank you. Will you put out an edict for people who work here to go to the State House?
I don't think I can put out edicts.
Well, not an edict, but tell people that they should go if they can.
I will certainly look into what I'm, shall we say, legally allowed to do. But I have no problem encouraging people all the time to express their point of view, to contact their legislators. This most recent turn with the Senate is not encouraging. I mean, you're out there arguing and advocating, and look at what just happened yesterday
It's
without
very
warning.
troubling.
It's extremely troubling. It's going in exactly the wrong direction. So I say, get out there and talk to everyone you can. We all should.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes. There's we need I've got to run to get you a microphone.
Maggie Walsh, English Department, FSU. And I just want to piggyback on the previous speaker. There are things you can do. You could provide buses. You could provide time off so that people can leave early and get themselves over to the Boston Common. The thing that's going to reach the state legislators and the governor is a huge crowd. I think that's the only thing. It's going to be raining
Is it?
next Thursday.
How do you know?
Unless we're lucky.
You know something we don't know.
No, I looked it up on my iPhone, and I am suggesting that you could buy a whole lot of dollar red raincoats.
I love that idea.
So there are small, practical things that you personally can help make happen that will show that you are 100% behind this push. Thank you.
Let me look into what's possible. I will tell you that, yes, let's give a hand there. I can make pronouncements about policies that have a direct effect on the university. So, for example, I was legally able to issue a forceful statement about the Cherish Act. That I can do. There are other things I actually cannot do. It's just not legally allowed, and I have to check on. For example, I don't believe I can spend any money toward a political advocacy campaign if that's how it's defined. So I have to look into this, but I love the idea. I don't know whether buses are really needed since we can all get on the red line and be in the common, that's how most of us get there. But I certainly do encourage people to attend, but please people, between now and tomorrow, that Senate budget, that's voted on tomorrow. If you have senators that represent you, contact everybody that you know, because in a week or so that may be a little late. But we're going to have to keep our voices strong and keep our advocacy clear, because if it passes through the Senate, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the House. The House budget was actually something we could live with. Not brilliant, not great, not allowing us to keep tuition flat, which is what we wanted. That would have taken an additional $10 million appropriation, and they didn't go that far. But they didn't hamstring us and make it impossible for us to raise the funding, and that's what they've done in the Senate budget. So I really have to hope cooler heads will prevail. I've been trying to reach Senator Spilka. She has not taken my call so far. But I've talked to other senators, and anybody that you know, I really encourage you to reach out. I've provided in the email that I sent around this morning some pretty sad illustrations of what that Senate budget would mean. Those are not idle. Those are actual real calculations. It would be horrible if we actually have to put them into play. But I want you to know that's not alarmist, that's real. So you might keep those numbers in mind if you contact people on behalf of the right way forward. Next question. Yeah.
Thanks, Ann. Tom Goodkind, CSM. I'm interested in, under solutions and initiatives, what you proposed for the enrollment efforts, particularly in that category.
Mm-hmm.
Overwhelmingly, they focus on international and out-of-state students.
Oh, no, most of our efforts are in-state. These are just some of the ones that are
These are the things
bulleted.
you're focusing on as a solution and initiative, as solutions and initiatives. There's Shorelight, Navitas, merit scholarships to attract out-of-state students, and a focus on increasing summer enrollment. I don't know where that tends to fall. I'm sure a lot of people
Mostly
here-
in-state.
Okay, but 3 out of 4 of those are focused on international. When you combine that with concerns about the increased cost of attendance, possibly raising tuition if we get the House budget, and the reduction in the discounting in financial aid, which you said was your last choice place to look.
Absolutely. I hope
but
we
you
never
must
have to
look
do
there.
it.
Shouldn't we begin to develop some concern about what's happening to the overall mission of the campus? I think a lot of us are concerned about that, and I feel like this deepens those concerns.
Well, it shouldn't really, because if we were to list everything that we do, and I could ask Lisa, our fantastic Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management, to talk about this if you're interested in more detail. But I believe something like 90, maybe excessive 90% of our students are in-state. Lisa, where are you? Oh, she had to leave. It's about 90% of our students are in-state. I didn't mention that because it is what we do primarily all the time and where the vast majority of our enrollment comes from, and properly so. The other roughly 10%, I would say, is a combination of out-of-state and international students. Now, those students pay a premium to come here, and the premium they pay goes straight into financial aid for in-state students. We would not have nearly the budget we need for in-state financial aid if we didn't have that out-of-state and international enrollment, because they pay significantly more. But they're not a very high proportion. They're way smaller here than almost everywhere else I know. Nonetheless, because they are full payers, if we can improve our performance in that regard, then we can protect more of the financial aid that we should be giving to our in-state students. When I said that was the last thing I want to do, I mean that quite sincerely. We should be going the other direction. We should be increasing the financial aid we give to our students. The legislature should help us with that by, giving us increased appropriations so that we don't need to charge them more. I don't think there's a person in this room who wouldn't disagree with that. So as far as I'm concerned, the mission of this campus is very clear. It is here especially, and most especially, for first-generation, low-income students from minority backgrounds and working-class households who are mainly commuter students and probably always will be. That is who this campus was built for. That is who I personally feel most committed to, and I think that that's true of all of us. And what we have to do is figure out how we finance that, because it's getting harder and harder to do that. But we are going to do everything we can to protect that mission. I don't think you need to worry about whether that remains front and center. It always will be. There's a question over here. Hi. Hi.
My name is Yelena. I'm an undergrad
Hi.
here. Just to continue the question from before and what you just said, I was an international student here in 2001. I transferred from Quincy College. I am now a resident. And I did take a very long break in between coming back, and I will be hopefully graduating.
Congratulations.
Thank you. These past few years that I've been a resident student full-time, in comparison to my tuition, which I paid back in 2001 and 2002, which was as an international student paying premium, now as a resident I pay just about the same. So this is about 18 years difference where resident tuitions and fees have gone up to be the same level as what international student fees were in 2001 and 2002. So with the bill, with the Cherish Act that hopefully will pass, if it does, it's just going to bring back the budget to where it used to be in 2000. So with everything that's been discussed, I'm wondering what is being done to protect the in-state students?
Well, the budget request we made would have gone a very long way toward helping, at least to stabilize, if not reduce. You know, in the era you're talking about, the state budget provided 80% of the cost of education. Now it's less than 20%. That's pretty much the explanation for what's happened to tuition. And that's a political question, how the state spends its resources. But it's going in exactly the wrong direction. And I completely accept what you're saying. And what are we doing? Well, we're trying to hold costs down as much as we can. We shed a lot of very valuable staff through early retirement. We have tried to become more efficient. We have, tried to raise money to help with scholarships. But the truth of the matter is, in the end, the only real way to address the question you're talking about is increase state appropriations, and we are going to argue for that. We do every year, and we need your help as residents and voters.
If I may, another question. I personally am doing what I can. I'll be there on the 16th. I was there before, throughout this year. I'm wondering for the things that can be done in-house. Recently in the Globe, I read an article about the mixed economy that's going to be developed by a private developer at Bay Expo that's going to yield $235 million to the system.
Bayside. Mm-hmm.
And it was announced that $75 million of that is going to go to a brand new online program that's supposed to, it's an online college. That's what it said in the Globe.
There's no relationship between the Bayside money and that online college.
Okay. Well, it's money coming in and money coming out.
No, unfortunately, the Bayside funds, which I'm very relieved are coming to this campus, because the Bayside property was purchased with bond money, there are very strict restrictions on what it can be used for. It can only be used for capital projects, so it cannot be used for our operating budget at all. That's just the law.
Okay, so well, if I may ask about the new online college.
Yeah, that's a completely different enterprise, but
Okay.
sure.
So, and that's exactly my question. Why is there a new enterprise being created when there are so many needs right here on the enterprises that already exist? I am in a class where there's almost 100 students in an upper level math course with one faculty and one TA. There's just not enough resources. There's no services for the students. There's no tutoring.
I agree.
And yet there's a new online college that's being created when there's already online classes. And this is also we can compete with Southern New Hampshire or whatever out of state and attract
right
other
now,
state
Southern
students.
New Hampshire, just to take an example, which is a nonprofit, there are some 15,000, I believe I got the numbers right here, don't quote me because I could be wrong, but there's some 15,000 Massachusetts residents who are enrolled in an out-of-state entity who are getting a kind of education that we're not providing right now, that's mostly for adults returning to school who didn't complete their undergraduate degrees, probably wouldn't be accepted into this university because they are a very different kind of student. They are somebody who tried and dropped out. And the effort there, as I understand it, is to try and develop a different type of online offering in order to pull back some of that enrollment that's fleeing to Southern New Hampshire. Meanwhile, Arizona State, University of Maryland, they're mounting these massive efforts that are going to come here and try and capture that enrollment too. So I think the thinking behind it is if we can create a strong program, especially for degree completion students, then that will become revenue that can help our campus. Because that new entity, whenever it comes to existence, it's not intended to be profiting. Its money is going to be divided up among the campuses. So the basic idea is there's a population that needs educational offerings, and we're not really providing them right now. They need 7-8 starts a year. We don't do that. They need wraparound services and counseling of a kind we can't provide. We may benefit from some of those things in the end when this comes to pass, but right now that effort is aimed at a different student population, an older returning student population. So, and this is not something we're doing. This is a different enterprise. Thank you for your questions. Other questions out there?
Hi,
Oh, where are you?
right here.
Oh.
Eliza Wilson. I'm an alum.
Yes, Eliza, where are you? Sorry, I
Right
can't
here.
see. Okay.
I'm right here,
Oh, right.
waving at you. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So as we work with folks in the legislature, one of the things that came through in the House was the recommendation to reduce the salary of the chancellor and other administrative roles here by 10%. It would be a shame, like you said, to reduce financial aid and other services for students. So would you be willing to take a pay cut for the sake of this campus?
Eliza, I don't think that's an appropriate question. I'll talk to you offline about that if you like. Let me just say on behalf of my colleagues in administration, we compete against other universities for this talent. When those salaries are set, they are set with very clear guidelines that look at the competitive salaries of other people in at the same rank. If the university wants to have strong faculty, it has to offer a competitive wage, and if it wants strong deans, it's going to have to do the same. And if we hire people and we give them a salary and then we tell them that salary isn't for real, they don't stay here very long. So I understand the political point, but I don't think it's a very effective solution. And regardless of what I would do personally, I certainly would not want to see this happen to any of my administrative colleagues whose loyalty, whose extraordinary efforts, whose round-the-clock attention to this campus is sorely needed. That was a cheap political shot, and the reason it didn't survive is that everybody knew that's what it was. Other questions? I think there's a question right here.
This is not a question, but it's like a perspective thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about the kind of population that this online program being
serve.
created, I just have to say that UMass Boston actually had that in the form of the College of Public and Community Service. That college was actually geared toward looking for non-traditional students, adult population, folks who'd been out in the job market doing a lot of things in their lives, but just never got around to doing their BA degrees.
Mm-hmm.
It also had a program called a degree completer program at that point. And I've been around for many years, and I've been arguing, saying, look, and this is not on you because it's the prior administrations. I've been arguing, saying, look, you all are being very short-sighted right now. There's a college that's trying to do something. What should be happening at this point is a lot of support because this is the wave of the future. Nobody listens.
Well, you're prescient. What can I say? I think, out in my previous job, the University Without Walls has a similar focus. The kind of services that are needed to be effective, when you look at, we had a presentation from the folks who were creating this online entity, and they've studied all of the programs all over the country, and they require a kind of structure that no campus-based, existing campus-based program I know about actually has. Again, 8 starts a year, 24/7 advising. The programs are in things like cybersecurity and logistics. They're very, very practical. They lead directly to a job opportunity. And I do think there is a degree of overlap. I absolutely grant you that. And there may be ways in which our campus can actually participate that would be helpful to us. But I do recognize that some of those structural supports are not things that we do. Southern New Hampshire, however, does do that, and that's one of the reasons why they have such a large and growing enrollment. Remember that this is all in the context of a decline in the demographics of our region. Going forward, as some of you have heard me say, in the next 8 years, there will be a 25% shrinkage in the college-age population in the Northeast. That is not a salutary development for us. It means the kinds of students we traditionally look for, at least in that age group, are going to be fewer and fewer in number and highly sought after. Very competitive market. It's not an accident that we see, small liberal arts colleges closing because their business model just doesn't seem to be workable hardly at all anymore. So we need to look at non-traditional student markets. if we're going to avoid some of these nastier budget cuts that we don't want to see happen. But I credit that you were ahead of the curve. I'll have to call you again. Yeah, right up there.
Hi, so I'm Joe Ramsey. I teach in the English and American Studies departments, and I am an elected rep in the FSU Faculty Staff Union for non-tenure track faculty. The question I have, I mean, I feel like we're living kind of like feels like a split universe, right? Where all this talk about new abundance in the state, the Bayside money, you know, the new day for UMass, but then it's like abundance on one hand, and but then it's like next breath it's austerity again.
Good point.
Right? And so, I mean, obviously, I mean, the political solution you point to is necessary. But I want to come back to that Bayside money a little bit, because, I mean, I'm no expert here, but Yelena's point about, well, it is money coming in and money going out, like, I'm not trying to tie it to the online aspect, but just, I understand that there may be legal restrictions on the Bayside money, but it does seem to me that insofar as the highest increase in cost that I saw in the next couple years has to do with depreciation and interest and stuff that sounds like it's on the capital budget side, but ends up impinging our, the other side, right? Our the operating budget. Can you point us to any potential for Bayside help, relief here?
Yes.
And if not, I mean, what are the obstacles? And to what degree can they be tactically maneuvered around rather than?
Very good question, Joe, and I'm going to let Kathleen answer it because this gets a little more technical.
Sure. So with Bayside, as the Chancellor said, it is for qualified capital funding. So the first thing we really expect, so right now we're in the process of negotiating, the UMass Building Authority is negotiating with Accordia around the overall lease agreement, and we'll begin the permitting process upon that completion. The first thing we expect to use this money for is for the substructure project. We have $77.5 million of funding that is required for that. Without without Bayside, that is something that the university, once it goes through the money it had borrowed for REAB, needs to borrow. So that would be additional stress on the budget. We can avoid that through Bayside. Then we're working very closely with the University Building Authority and the UMass Board of Trustees. We will be looking at what kind of capital investments would be made for the university and how that could help us on the capital side. We do expect part of the funding would also be used. Bayside, there was money that was borrowed to pay for Bayside when it was originally purchased. That's going to need to be defeased so that the property can move forward into development. But then the process is still being worked out. This is a university that has $750 million of deferred maintenance. We're moving people out of the science center and into different places. We need to begin, and we're going to begin in the next fiscal year, a capital planning process to really look at what are some of the future homes as we look with the academic master plan and strategic planning that we might need. The state has got money in a bond bill regarding the nursing program. Where's that going and how we might need to look at that moving forward. So there's lots of opportunities for us to have some dialogue and discussion around that, but it's not going to be money that will be immediately able to offset the operating challenges that we talked about in terms of tuition and fees revenue and the demographics of the students. But in terms of the capital side of the university and the support that we would have for our students, there's lots of opportunities, and all of us will be working to continue that discussion with the Building Authority and the UMass Board of Trustees.
So, Joe, I wish it was all interchangeable, and it just isn't. But it will still be helpful. I mean, if we had to, as Kathleen said, if we had to borrow the money to complete that substructure, it would just make things worse. At least we won't have to do that, I hope, if everything works well with Bayside. So, thank you for your question. Other questions? There's one right there.
Hi, I'm Samantha from the biology department. It's kind of funny that you mentioned the science center being all evacuated. As you know, there's still some of us who were moved in there because of the REAP project and blah, blah, blah. But once all of that is done, we're all moved, and we get more finances in the next fiscal year, what's gonna happen to not only the science center itself, but what about the greenhouse? Because last we heard there was nothing planned with them, and a lot of our departments actually rely on that greenhouse for our research. Not only research, but teaching labs themselves. And the students actually enjoy going up there.
I'm sure
so
they do.
I want to know what the plans are.
So, as you know, the science structure is going to come down. Starting in the summer of 2020, the whole thing is going to be pulverized, and so will the substructure. And what will be out there is a gigantic green lawn in the middle of the campus. I don't know do you want to speak to the greenhouse?
So I mean, as the Chancellor said, so we're taking steps right now to relocate operations out of the Science Center. The greenhouse is something that's still being examined. There is work being done within the colleges. It's not something that we have a solution in place today, like say RAB, where there's a contract, but it's something that we're looking at to find how we can look at that operation going forward and how that might look. So the School for College Science and Math, as well as some folks on the capital planning side and with the university administration, we're looking to try to see how we can find a solution for that. So that's still under development.
You know, one of our highest priorities is going to be to find really good homes for the programs that are coming out of the Science Center. That's one of my biggest concerns, and one of the things that probably will be the Bayside funding will be important for. We're going to end up putting our nursing school in laboratories and whatnot in our building. That's not the right place for the nursing program. So we need a long-term solution that's that will work for everyone who's being evacuated, if you will. And that's going to take a master planning process. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Is there one more question? No? Well, if not, let me thank you once again for your attention, for your devotion to this place. Please keep your eyes on that Ways and Means budget because we need your help in getting through this. Thank you, colleagues.